recommended that it be fired from a squatting or kneeling position, which may have made it easier to wield. Like all Japanese rifles used in World War II, it had a dust cover over the action. But the cover was a lousy feature for soldiers who took pride in their stealth.
In many cases, Japanese soldiers apparently removed the dust cover and threw it away when they got into combat and realized that they were making a lot of extra noise that they didn't need to be making.
Despite its shortcomings, the Type 38 was carried into battle with pride and an aura of invincibility. The receiver of each rifle was stamped with the chrysanthemum, the symbol of the imperial family.
It was a gift from God, I guess you could look at it that way. The emperor was thought to be divine. So there was definitely a responsibility that transcended.
These pistols were somewhat outdated. The most widely used was the Type 14. It was distinguished by horizontally grooved wooden grips.
The good aspects was that it had a very easy trigger pull. It was very smooth and light. It had a good balance to the hand, so it was easy to fire, and it was made of good quality materials.
The pistol was semi-automatic and fed by a magazine that held 7 rounds of 8mm ammunition. The Type 14 was low-powered, puny compared to the sidearm the U.S. Army used, the Colt 45. Even the trigger guard was tiny. It was eventually enlarged, which enabled a user wearing gloves to fire it. Officers of the Imperial forces were required to purchase their pistols. Given that option, some bought European models. In this one instance, feelings of Japanese superiority took a back seat to practicality. The Type 14 simply didn't measure up to the competition.
The striker's springs were very weak, and the more you used it, the weaker the springs became. So that if you would use it for a while, there's a greater chance that you would misfire, which of course would not be very good when you're fighting in the battle.
Whatever their drawbacks, Japanese arms were in good supply in 1941. So was ammunition. To keep the flow coming, the 1-sen coin was withdrawn from circulation. The copper was melted down and made into bullet jackets. Japan was more than successful in the initial stages of the Pacific Campaign, proof to them that the tools they had to work with were entirely adequate. After all, they were good enough to kill the enemy, and did. But a drop in the quality and quantity of arms eventually would have an effect, as the Imperial Empire's reach exceeded its grasp. History has judged some Japanese weapons as little more than junk, but their inferiority didn't prevent Imperial forces from taking Guam and Wake Island, nor Hong Kong and New Guinea, killing many in the process. Japan seemed unstoppable as it took Malaya, Java, the Philippines, and Burma. But Japan was no longer on the offensive after its defeat at Midway in June of 1942. By that summer, ground troops were about to enter new territory, jungle fighting the likes of which had never been seen. It was here that the myth of Japanese invincibility was shattered. Japanese arms weren't designed for jungle warfare. Once that shortcoming was realized, it was too late to compensate. U.S. forces had been alerted to the Japanese soldiers' superior skills in certain tropical environments. However, the warnings failed to mention that the Imperial Army lacked actual jungle training. There were no jungles in Japan.
They failed to take certain precautions that were critical in the South Pacific. For example, they did not waterproof their rounds or the packaging that carried the ammunition. What would happen is the humidity would destroy a lot of it. This is a terrible flaw.
They tried to eliminate the problem by sealing, with lacquer, the bullets and primers in the cartridges. Both sides were at a disadvantage in this way, but the Japanese were sorely lacking in another area that to this day remains unexplained. For most of World War II, they went without the one weapon that was perfectly suited for the battles at hand: a submachine gun.
I mean, they're the ideal weapon for jungle work instead of carting a full-size rifle about. And I think, too, that the higher echelons of the army were a little bit resistant to this peculiar weapon that they didn't have that when I was a young man, you know, so what the hell do they want it now for? Rifles were good enough in my day. Why do they want submachine guns?
The Type 100 submachine gun was finally introduced in 1942.